us?
She knows me by another nickname. So TK, she knows me as KP.
Wow.
I've got a few acronyms in my life.
You know, the more you have, the more I'm going to think you're wanted by the law.
Oh, no. This is the man who writes crime fiction.
Well, yeah, that kind of comes back around full circle.
This is great.
All right, it's 1 o'clock. Let's begin here. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me, Jim Woods, on this story making show. I'm excited to be with author TK Johnson. She is an author of 3 books so far from the Loraillvon Series. And with 3 books published, she has another one set for release this year in 2021. Her stories help readers face dragons of our world through the fiction before they confront them in reality. Thank you so much for being with me, TK.
Hey, it is an honor and a privilege. I love getting together just to talk about stories in general. So this is going to be a very fun time together.
Couldn't agree more. So for anyone who isn't familiar with your books or your series, how did you get into writing? How did you get into writing fantasy specifically?
It goes back all the way to 5th grade. I remember sitting at my little 5th grader desk. We had the little drawers inside. I pulled out a notebook, a number 2 pencil, and I basically wrote like a fan fiction. I didn't know that's what it was in the day, but I was a big fan of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, the video game on Nintendo 64. I was a nerd, loved it, saved all my pennies for it. And I started writing a story about an aging hero who was too old to fight anymore, but too much in love with his country to give up the fight. And so I wrote about him training the new generation of fighter. And I look back and I'm like, wow, I was real advanced for a 5th grader.
Yeah.
The writing was terrible, but the idea was spectacular.
That's incredible.
That's where it started. And it kind of just grew from there, little stories here at a time. I started using story to communicate with my family. I remember I got really mad at my sister one time. They went off with friends and I wasn't invited. And so I wrote this story about a girl who had been left out and how hurt she was by that. And I left it up on my computer for my sister to read when she came home because we shared a bedroom. And she read it and she left a reply and I woke up to the reply the next morning. And so I used it as a communication tool for a while. But the story series that I published, really I started, we moved to Atlanta. I had 8 months of complete boredom. I wasn't working. I was too scared to drive the streets of Atlanta because it's terrible traffic. And I worked with a nonprofit that worked with hurting teens and families that went through some rough situations. And I just wanted to tell the kind of the coming of age story through those kinds of situations and what that looked like for a young girl going through maybe an abusive household, abusive family, and how she found hope and relationships through that. So the series of Loraillvon was born.
That's incredible. And what that topic is so it's powerful, but it's also very adult, mature.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, your early fan fiction story was such that's just so advanced. Like that's not the typical superhero story.
No, it's not. Nope.
Have you always been drawn to that kind of more deeper topics? Because even like in your bio, you said like in facing the dragons of our world through fiction before confronting them in reality. Have you always kind of been that way?
I think so. And I don't know what spurred that, what made me care more about the deeper stories, the stories with deep hurts, but redemptive value. I'm not really sure. I mean, the very first time I got into reading was in 4th grade, and I'm going to age myself here. Harry Potter, the very first book came out in 4th grade. I loved it. It was a good adventure. He had a difficult home situation. And I thought that was unique to see a kid in a situation like that. I didn't personally know that any of my friends had situations like that if they did. But from there, then I went to Gail Carson Levine's series and her different books, and Ella Enchanted is a big one. But I got so emotionally involved with Ella's story. Her sister steals her necklace, and I was so mad. I was going to quit reading the book. I couldn't stand that sister. Oh, I was angry about it. But the hurt went deeper than just, oh, my petty fights with sisters. It was who she was as a person, and she had a curse on her, and she had to learn to be a good person while still dealing with this terrible thing that happened to her. So I think it was just really the books that I read were deeper, and they dealt with some more serious situations, even though they were set in a fantastical way. And that just kind of stayed with me forever, I guess.
It's funny how those early stories, you just kind of you latch onto them. You might not realize it even at the time. And then you come back and you're like, wow, this is like a common thread
Yes.
throughout that
Yeah.
you're just
Yep.
keeping a hold
Definitely.
of. That's incredible. And so take me back to when you were writing your
Mhm.
very first novel. Not just like the fan fiction story. Was that a full novel?
No, but it will be one day.
Ooh, good answer. That's the
Yeah.
best answer I could ever hear. I love that. That's great. So take me though to like when you were writing your first
Mm.
novel, like as you're in that phase of I think I want to write a book,
Yeah. Yeah.
way before you wrote Self-Conclusion.
Yeah. The first one was called The Princess of Heart. And what's funny
Mhm.
is this is another one. I wrote that one in high school, but this is another one I want to go back to rewrite and publish because it was written with a young high schooler's mind. But I loved The Princess Bride growing up, mostly the movie, because that's what I grew up on. I read the book later on in college, but I loved the movie. I love that classic romance with a little bit of humor, adventure, all those little elements thrown in that we know about with The Princess Bride. Loved it. But I felt like every time me and my siblings went to choose a movie to watch or we went to pick up a book to read, I was like, where's that classic adventure story? And it was hard to find. And so I wrote The Princess of Hearts, which is a princess who really is young and selfish and full of herself. And she becomes endangered, has to run away to a neighboring country that she thinks very little of, and finds out they're actually more powerful than she ever knew. And she should have respected them, and she didn't. And, she changes as a person and how she views the world. But, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't a big thing back then to write a book. It was just, I have this really cool story. So I wrote it. I struggled with, the characters and how to write an ending. And then when I finished it, it was done. I had two friends I let read it. And it's funny because those friends, when I first published my book, my other book, they were like, I remember those books you wrote in high school.
Awesome.
And it's so cool. But yeah, it wasn't as challenging, I guess, as it seems these days. These days, if you write a book, and I know high schoolers face this, it feels like it has to be a full novel. You have to really write a novel. And there's a lot of stigma behind it. I think I was lucky that I didn't face that so much when I was in high school. Not everything you did had to turn into an entrepreneurial business. It could just be for fun.
Is that what you mean by the stigma? Like it has to be a full novel and you have to write a series or what can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at middle schoolers and elementary school kids, like the parents are already thinking of college at that age and building up to their future and their career. And so it's like anytime kids spend time on extracurriculars,
Mm.
they're doing it for that reason or because they want to become famous on Instagram or they want a TikTok video that makes it big. And so it feels like there's a lot of pressure for young people that whatever they do has to either make it big or it's not worth doing. And that's so not true. It's so much pressure on yourself to think that way.
Right. And those expectations that you
Yeah.
might not even define, you might just
Mhm.
have them out there, but you never define them. And then it's like, ooh.
Yep, yep. And I mean, you're a parent. I'm sure you see it with other kids that your kids are friends with or hang out with. The new Mighty Ducks series on Disney Plus is all about them leaving. This mom says, I don't want you to play for the Ducks because it's a bunch of career moms. They're moms and parents out there just saying,
Mhm.
you're playing hockey because you're going to be a professional. You have to be on this team. They can't just have fun playing hockey anymore.
I'm so glad you pointed out fun because it's
Mhm.
written all over your face as you're talking, especially fourth, fifth grade. You're like,
Mhm.
I had no expectations. It was just fun.
Yes. Yeah.
What about as adults? I even hesitate to call myself an adult anymore sometimes.
Mhm.
I'm an adult, but like as adults, it's fun isn't really in our vocabulary so much. It's more, career and success
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
all these other serious words.
Yeah.
How do you keep the fun going with your writing, like even today with your
Yeah.
books now?
Honestly, I feel like it's a little more challenging just because I've seen so many stories, I've watched so many movies. If I don't find it fun, I don't want to write it. And it's really interesting because I saw this as writing advice. If you're bored in the scene that you're writing, so is your reader. They're going to be bored reading it. So write what interests you, what you find exciting and fun, or don't write it. And so it's a good and bad challenge. It's bad because when you get bored, you're like, oh, why am I doing this? But then it's a good challenge because you're like, all right, well, what would inspire you here or what challenges you? And that's, I think for me, that's plot twists. I'm always like, how can I add one more twist to really surprise the reader? I pride myself on being able to have surprise endings or surprise twists in the middle. And I really enjoy that. I love it because so often I watch movies and it's so easy to guess what's coming. I feel like.
Yeah.
And I don't
All
mean
right.
in a prideful way. I've taken a lot of script analysis and script writing classes. I'm a
Yeah.
reader, so I was taught to learn to see what's coming.
Right.
And it's just too easy now, it feels like. I feel like some writers just take the easy way. And so I like being able to add a twist.
That's incredible. On that topic,
Mm-hmm.
plot twists,
Yeah.
movies, which ones jump at you? And we don't have to give a bunch of spoilers, but if it's been out for a while, it's fair game. What are some of your favorites?
Safest to say, Christopher Nolan knows how to surprise people. He still does a good movie. Memento, I mean, I know that one's older. Surprise endings there. Inception, it really makes you think. And even the ending, you're not sure which way it really ended. So things Christopher Nolan I enjoy because he makes you really think about it. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of like a movie or show I've watched recently where I'm like, I love that ending or I love that twist, but I don't know if I can think of one. I mean, there's also just good writing. Mandalorian, I would say, is good writing, you know?
Yeah, that was so good. That really was.
They take all these secondary, you know, background characters from the originals and they make it an entire series that holds its own. Like, that's amazing to me. Mm-hmm.
One element, even with Mandalorian, it's like the nostalgia is very heavy.
Yeah.
But it adds to the story. It's not the story itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where sometimes like, I feel like some stories, it's like, hey, remember this? Remember this? It's almost like they're tapping you, hey, remember this? And I think that almost detracts from it. But if it adds to it, you know, it becomes like, you know, sprinkles on the sundae or something like that, enhancing it.
Yeah, it's funny. I just made this connection as you're talking. Nostalgia in movies is like tropes in books. I never thought of that before. And I feel like a genius. I'm sure it's not a new idea. People love certain tropes. They're attracted to those tropes. And that's why they want to read some books or they enjoy some books more. Some people hate tropes. It all depends on the trope, I think. But I think that's kind of what nostalgia is for movies, tropes is for books.
You know, I think a more recent example, like I believe it was Jurassic World, where they had a few hat tips like, hey, remember this? This is like a callback to what happened in the, 4 movies back in the original Jurassic Park or something like that. And it reminded me a little bit of like a good comedian. They'll have a joke earlier in their set and then they'll call back and refer to it again.
Yes.
And it like adds to the story. It's like, you know what I mean? It's adding to it. It's not like, hey, my whole entire thing is dependent on just nostalgia.
Yeah.
So,
well, and those kinds of things, they're a little overwhelming to think of, but they're also, again, one of the joys of writing. And I don't know how much you've experienced this in your writing, but there's so much you learn about what you can do with writing. There is layer upon layer upon layer. There's the writing in the tropes. There's the nostalgia pieces. There's, hey, they said this time. We're going to refer back to it later in the book. Let's see if you catch it. Someone the other day said, you know, I think it was like the 10 rules of writing. And one of them was your first character's line has to basically describe your character. And I thought, ooh, that's a fun challenge. Make sure the first thing someone says describes their personality in that one line. I thought that was pretty cool.
I really like that too. Vicky asked a question, said, well, what's a trope? Which is an amazing question in of itself.
Yes, I actually didn't know what a trope was until like 2 weeks ago, which maybe is really bad as a writer and someone who's published 3 books, but I didn't. I never heard the word. I knew what they were. I just never heard the word. Do you know an official definition? I know examples.
As I'm looking it up on Google.
Yeah. I'll give examples while you find a definition.
No, the definition's not even that great.
Oh, okay.
It's something in a story that you are familiar with and you see used all the time. I think it's probably not the most amazing example of a trope, but you see it so much. I feel it has become a trope. Would be like the weapon that you see earlier in the story is used later. And I know you've mentioned it before, TK. I'll let you elaborate on what that really is.
Yeah.
Feel free.
Well, that example was writing advice someone gave me one time too. It was, if you walk into a cabin and someone describes the cabin, if you describe the gun on the mantle, it means the gun has to be used. If you describe it, you have to use it. Otherwise, don't mention it.
Yeah.
But for the fantasy genre, especially, tropes are like the enemies to lovers or love at first sight. Those are the romantic tropes. Then there's a ballroom scene. That's a trope. There's the there's the joke of like, there's only one bedroom scene, where characters, and this is romantic comedies a lot, where characters are forced to share a bedroom. That's a trope. Those cutesy little things that is forced upon the characters. Yeah, that happen.
The ultimate cheesy one is the girl has glasses and has her hair up, and then she takes off her glasses and puts her hair down. And she's like, and then of course the other character's like, oh, amazing, and you see that so much, even like Superman. I mean, come on, glasses on, glasses off, and it's like it's a common trope where you see it so much that you just don't even. And I know you and I have talked about this before, where it's like, I think some people actually get scared of them, but in certain genres, it's expected. It's like going to see your favorite band and they're not playing the greatest hits.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a great explanation and a fantastic analogy. Yeah. Because you pick up a certain book, you expect certain things. If it's not there, you're like, I mean, if you're not having some tropes, you got to be really good at your story to get away with it and have people enjoy it.
I think as someone who loves plot twists, as you said, I think it's taking those tropes and just knowing they exist, and then, maybe bending some or turning some on their head.
Yeah.
What everyone's expecting the same thing to happen if they've seen, those familiar tropes, which they have, but especially in fantasy, it's going to be like, okay, I'm setting you up, oh, pulling the rug away.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So
you thought this was about to happen.
Right.
Definitely.
So fun. So fun. I think it's one of those things that it does take time to recognize them. And it's such an important part of story structure. Knowing that fantasy is primarily based on the hero's journey, is that your favorite structure?
It is. I know I'm a fan of third person writing and multiple point of views. Now, obviously you can't have too many point of views. It gets really hard for the reader to track with as they go. But my very first book I wrote as first person. And then I learned third person gives you so much more flexibility. And really it was self-conclusion, my first book, that I gave to some beta readers, and they said, it just gets a little slow because it's her all the time. Yeah, she's with people. And so that's when I learned switching point of view makes it more fun for me as a writer, if we're talking about fun again, and it makes it more fun for the reader. And you get a little bit more insight into all these different people in the book, which allows you to kind of question a little bit more people's motives, what's going on, what could be coming. All my characters tend to have a secret. There's always someone with a secret. So
interesting. Now you have me extra intrigued here. That's great, though.
Yeah.
That's great. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that makes so much sense. It's like that draws you in even more when, like, I personally, I have a hard time with that because I'm so freaking open. Like, I'm an open book and I can't stand secrets because I'm like, no, tell me. But now you drew me in. So you're working on me here.
Well, and I hate writers who take the easy way out. When someone has a secret that the reader knows and they have the opportunity to tell everybody and they're like, oh no, but I'm too scared. How will they react? What will they think? Like it's become almost a trope that, the main character hides this secret that they have, but usually the secret's not that big of a deal. Like people would accept them for it. It wouldn't cause that much trouble. But I feel like it's become the easy way out to just have a character not speak the truth. Yeah. Whereas writing that conversation, writing how that mistrust was now born, or that, there's tension now, that's the harder thing to do, is to write that conflict and then to say, oh no, I'm keeping the secret. And then it'll become the big cliffhanger at the end, or the big, I don't know. It feels like the easier way out to me. I would rather.
Because then it's that wrap it up, tie it up, hits the ending. Here you go.
Yeah. And it's always little secrets. When it's big secrets, like, hey, this could affect the safety of my family. those are different than, oh, but I have this secret mission that I can't tell anybody. Eventually, we all know they're going to find out they're with you through the whole journey. So, like, the reader already knows that.
Right. Totally makes sense. Now, as you were like writing your first ever novel that you
Mhm.
published and shared with the world, Self Conclusion, which is available on Amazon, what were
Mhm.
your challenges writing that first book, that
Oh,
first novel that you're like,
yeah.
okay, this isn't just for me.
Mhm.
Yes, obviously it's for fun. We've talked about that, but like this is to share with the world. What were your challenges during writing of that?
Yeah. So many challenges. I'm like, where do I start?
Anything that comes to mind.
Yeah.
This is a fun casual chat. So,
Yeah.
whatever jumps at you now, or
Yeah.
even if you can't remember that, like even during the writing of the other books too.
Hmm. Yeah. In general, there was the pressure of, I want to publish this, but how do I do that? Is it good enough?
Mm,
I've read books and I think this is really good, but I'm the writer. Of course, I think that. Everyone who writes their own book thinks it's amazing. And so really I have to credit my husband for the success of my books, because I am terrible at research, which is not a good thing for a writer. But I'm terrible at research. I didn't know how to find out how to publish on my own or traditionally.
mm,
He connected me with an author he knew from one of our hometowns, saying, "Hey, I know someone who has traditionally published."
yeah.
So she read my first couple of chapters, and I was so blessed by her that she was willing to do that. So she read the first couple of chapters, gave me feedback, which is like the foundation of what helped me be a good writer. And then she told me, if you want to do traditional publishing, here's what it looks like. That road is hard. That road means you're giving up all your creative freedom, pretty much. That road means you write your book, you hand it over, everyone else decides what they want to do with it. Here's what self-publishing looks like. Here's what indie publishing looks like. And of course, everyone wants to traditionally publish, but it is
Mhm.
so difficult. I mean, it really feels like the world of who do you know? But
That's fair.
my husband figured out how to do the self-publishing route, and that in itself was its own struggle, just of the publishing side. I went really long with that one. I would say my second biggest struggle was having people read the book, which
Mm,
sounds funny. And I'm not talking about just finding people saying, please read my book, finding readers. I had people willing to read it, and people did not like it at all. They hated it. Not for the story. They loved the story. Yay. But I had family who read it who said, if we tell people that you wrote this, they'll think it's about our family. It's an
mm,
abusive situation in the beginning. And they said, what if people
right,
wonder if this is what really happened to you?
right.
And they said it was so real. It was descriptive enough. Like, it was very hard to read. My mom is a mom of 4, and she said, I can't do it. She read it once and she skipped it every time after that, because she said it is too hard to know that a mom would be that way or a dad would be that way, that any parent could do this to their child.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I talked with families and teenagers. That's exactly what they went through. And so it's a difficult read. But yeah, so I had family that said, please do not publish this book. And if you do, just take out those parts. They're not needed. But that's what makes the story. That's why this girl finds herself in a fantastical world.
Right.
That's what helps her figure out how to fix relationships in her life and be who she is meant to be, was because of the hardships that she went through. So it's hard when readers don't like what you wrote or they're offended by what you wrote. It's also embarrassing. And I posted about this the other day. It's really embarrassing to be like, have this little peek into my mind. I hope you like
Yeah.
to read. Like, it's very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. And you've written a couple of books. Like, have you had that embarrassing moment yourself?
Yeah, I will be. Not I haven't published fiction yet as much,
Mhm.
like as in book form, but
Yeah.
just having it out there it is a little like, hey, here's a magnifying glass, search my brain a little.
Mhm.
One thing that did encourage me though a lot, TK, was like, especially with fiction, yeah, we want to assume, well, hey, that happened to you, or hey, that happened to me.
Yeah.
But we, like you said earlier, we're inundated with so many different stories.
Mhm.
Like I've heard it said that we were actually, we've digested more stories than anyone in like
Mm.
any point in human history.
Man, that's crazy.
And I think that's totally true. When you think,
Yeah. Yeah.
even like right now, we're telling stories, we're talking about stories, and it's like all the social and movies and shows and
Mhm.
books and poems. And I mean, all day long, we're filling ourselves with stories.
Mhm.
Whereas, 20, 30 years ago, yeah, there was still a lot, but it wasn't as many.
Yeah, it wasn't
And
all day long almost, you know?
right,
It's
right,
constant now.
right.
Yeah.
The whole embarrassing thing, I think that actually means you're on the right track. You know what I mean? And it
Yeah.
sounds weird to say that out loud because I'm pretty I'll get shy and like embarrassed too. And they're like,
Mhm.
don't tell me my book baby's ugly, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
But I think it's part of the process. And, you know, being uncomfortable means you're digging deeper.
Yeah. Well, and I've always wondered too, is it a young writer's thing? Yes, I've written 3 books, but I'm still a young writer because I've only written in the same genre. I need to branch out. I need to write different series and novels because I think about this 4th book and I don't feel like I'm going to be embarrassed at all. I'm like, yes, they're going to love it. But my first book, I'm still a little embarrassed when people are like, I bought your book. And I'm like, oh, yay. You know, like,
I even told you that, and that was your response. You're
yes.
like,
Yeah, and I think it's because you learn so much as you keep going. And I know social media isn't the best place to spend your time and your knowledge. I'm actually a big advocate against social media for so many reasons, but I've learned a ton about better writing from following other authors, from getting those prompts from them, from hearing them tell their story. And so I look back at my first book, Self Conclusion, I'm like, ooh, I didn't have that super catching first chapter. But I'll tell you
mm,
what, chapter 3 and 4, you will not put this book down.
right.
My first chapter wasn't, and that's the chapter that needs to be, prophecy. Oh, this one scene, I should have been made it more robust, and it's not. And the final book of a trilogy usually is more robust here. And so I read and learn those things, and so I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a little embarrassed because it could have been better. But at the same time, like, it was my first 3 books, that I published. It's okay because my
Yeah,
next one is gonna be awesome. It's gonna slay dragons. No
that's
spoilers.
awesome.
No spoilers.
Figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
That's great.
Mhm.
No, I am so glad you brought that up because I think that is normal.
Mm.
Um, even if you were to, talk to a photographer and
Yeah.
they showed you some earlier photos, it doesn't matter even what kind. I mean, it's like, what if it was even a wedding photographer and they
Mhm.
showed you, hey, these are the first wedding I shot versus, hey, I've been doing this for a few years and
Yeah.
here's where I am now.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think it's such a common thread. And I even think of NaNoWriMo,
Mhm.
National Novel
Mhm.
Writing Month, which is in November, where so many people write a novel or start writing a novel, and a lot of them never finish, or even
Yeah.
if they finish, they don't publish.
Mhm.
And, it's so common. I mean, personally, I would love to see all those stories come into the world, but so many aren't. I mean, just by the nature of it. So I think it's like, hey, maybe make this a short story, right?
Yeah.
Versus
I've
making it a novel.
I've seen a statistic, and I don't remember the exact big number. I remember the little number easily. It was something like 85 or 88% of Americans want to write a book.
80, yeah.
1% do.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah.
quoting that fact for quite a while, and it's
Well,
like
look
an
at you.
old survey from the New York
Yes.
Times. It was 80%
Mhm.
want to,
Mm.
and less than half a percent, like
Less than half. Okay.
0.5%
Mm.
do it. And I wasn't sure about that, so I kind of verified it just to not be completely.
Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
if
Check.
you look at like the number of people and then
Mhm.
like the number of books published traditionally in self, it is such a
Yeah.
tiny, sliver. And
Yeah.
I think we all have so many stories to tell.
Yeah, but I love it because I'm like, oh, if you're a writer and you finished a book, be so proud. You're in that 0.5% of Americans. Like, that's huge. And if you want to write a book and you haven't, and you're like, oh, I'm not one of the, I'll never be that good. You can be. Come join the 0.5%. We're here for you. And I think that's the other thing. Writers, I feel like, are just such a great community. Everyone is so ready to help you, give advice, and it's not unsolicited advice necessarily that you're like, oh, okay, thanks. I just let me write my book. Usually they're like, hey, if you want any help, let us know. We're here for you. So that's what I've appreciated too from other authors. And that's the author I try to be. Like, I want to be there for others. Hmm.
Yeah. And that's so important. I think just creators in general,
Yeah.
we need we need that support. We need that encouragement too. And you do a wonderful job too, by the way, on
Thank
Instagram, especially as you're, uploading more stories and little videos there and
you.
reels and all of that.
Yeah.
So what excites you most about your current project, your new book that's coming out in 2021?
Yeah. Oh boy. It's funny. I've never tag teamed projects. Do one at a time, get them done, and then you can move on to the next fun thing. But I've been tag teaming this one. But this is a prequel to the Loraillvon series. So the trilogy that's already published is a prequel.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting to me because it's about someone who is mentioned in the first couple books. There is the legend of a dragon rider, which is so, basic fantasy.
Yeah.
But you meet his heir who becomes a dragon rider in the trilogy. And that's all you know about this guy, the first dragon rider, Delric, the first dragon rider.
Just that much. Just that
much.
little morsel.
I'm not writing a whole novel off of just that much. But I love it because, again, it goes into deeper issues. The different kind of outcasts you can have, even in an almost perfect world, there can still be outcasts. The way that people can come together. And then there's also, the way that history records things. Delric is a hero that wasn't recorded correctly, is what I'll say. Everyone remembers him as this great first dragon rider, a legendary hero, but they didn't get his full story, and you will learn more about that. And I think what excites me is the characters that people are going to meet, the characters that they'll identify with, because let's be honest, you always identify with one of the characters in the book, always, at least a little. But then just the adventure that they go on and what happens in the end. Because what happens in the end will tie into a future book called The Crown Maker. There's no secrets there. You're going to be seeing the original characters again, Taven, Sorel, Killian, Aloria. They're all coming back together, and their future is impacted by the past, by Delric's journey that he went on. And I can't say much more. That is so much more than a lot of people watching right now even know. But I did a little
dropping the secrets.
And yeah. Yeah, I'm just so excited, and I'm having so much fun writing it. I know my writing has improved. I think my storytelling has gotten better, and I can't wait. I can't wait. I get so excited. I had a friend the other day say, "Why don't you take your time publishing?" I know sometimes, your first 3 books you published, and you're like, "Oh, I wish I would have edited a little longer." And I said, I should, but I'm too excited. I want people to know what's happening. I feel like you can't miss it, and it's live. Come, you have to see. And I just want to share it.
Riding the momentum, taking that positive energy and that story excitement. Yeah, I like it.
Oh yeah, it's hard to hold it back when you just want everyone to know. Did you see what this dragon did? Oh my gosh, come here.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. And you lit up like a Christmas tree, right? When you started talking about your new book. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't mind, I'll give another little teaser.
Please.
I am switching gears, and I guess this is writing advice too. And we've talked about this before. I have Masterclass. Thank you so much, my mother-in-law, who has gifted me Masterclass with all these famous authors. But Neil Gaiman is one of them, and I loved his movie or his book Stardust that became a movie. Such a fun one. But he gave the advice that if you're a young author, write outside your genre. You have to try something new. It makes you grow. It makes you learn. And so I'm working on a contemporary fiction that's kind of like Snow White meets The Circle. So Snow White meets these big tech companies that are spying on you. And that seems like a very strange mashup, but I'm so excited. It's going to be great. But that's the venture that's in the planning and outlining stages as I write These Favored Shadows, which is the next Loraillvon book.
So you're writing that new book along with the other at the same time?
Yeah, These Favored Shadows is the Dragon Rider book.
Okay.
I'm writing that one. Yep. Okay. And then what I'm calling The Influencer, which is the contemporary fiction, I'm kind of outlining and planning as I write the other one. It's the first time I've tag teamed. It's actually going well because when I feel hung up or stuck on one book, then I can swap, and it's switching gears, but it's creativity that doesn't tire you out. So
that's so good. And I think anything like that you find energizing, or you get stuck in one thing, you go to that other thing, and make some progress there. I think
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Well, and you've given me some of that really great advice of, don't spend your day, if you want to write tonight, if you want to spend a couple of hours writing, do not do the things that will drain you creatively, creatively. I'm losing my words here.
No, you got it. I got
You
it.
can still work on that passion. You can sit down with your book later. And you've taught me kind of be careful with the parts of your mind you're using so you can use that creativity when you need it. Yeah.
And I've only learned that the hard way.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, finding those times that you are just more energetic, or
Mhm.
you just have more to say. And like it's funny because it's such a key thing for me. It's like where you're writing, when you're writing,
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
if you put it off toward the very end. And I'm a night owl, so this is hard. I'm like, I want to push it off to like, hey, no, I'll start at 10 o'clock at night or 9
No
o'clock
way.
at night
No
or
way.
whatever. I would ideally I would love to do that, but then I'm sleeping until 10 in the morning, and that
Yeah.
doesn't really
Yeah.
that doesn't make me a functioning adult.
Yeah, you have
So
to find your flow.
my kids, they're not going to go with that either. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
awesome. So any advice for other writers crafting a series? Because that's a whole different ball game than just writing one book. Any
Yeah.
advice for that?
Yeah. Oh, I might turn this back on you a little bit. I am the person, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a phrase like writing in the dark.
Mhm.
Yes, writing in the dark. I never knew that until you told me about that phrase the other day. And I'm like, I've never heard that before. But it's where you just sit down, you start writing, and you see what happens. That's always been that's the writing I did for this trilogy. I had the ending. I always know my ending because it's some big plot twist that I'm excited about. So I always have that ending and then the beginning, but I'm really bad at, okay, well, what's going to, like, how do they get to the ending? That's I just wrote in the dark and I let it flow and I let it happen. I let the ideas come as I was writing. That's one way to do it. But for new writers, someone looking to write either just a book or even a series, you have to think ahead. Yes, I wrote this trilogy, but now I'm finding what are those obscure little lines that I wrote, not really thinking about, that I can turn into a new book to keep this series going. I wish I had outlined, planned, thought through it more, took time to really just mull over it in my head so that I could have these little these little tidbits sprinkled in each book so that when you read book 5, you'll be like, oh, I have to read book 1 again. Oh my gosh, because they talked about this. I didn't even catch it, or
More
I
twists.
read it, but
Yeah.
didn't realize that's what it meant. Yeah. I mean, there's even the trilogy. I know I was lucky enough that I wrote in things that by the time you read book 3, the characters knew things you didn't in book 1 and book 2. So I've had readers say, oh my gosh, I had to go back and reread it right away because now I saw it through their eyes. And I love that. I love that the book is always going to be fresh and different and new when you come back to it a couple months later or because you read another one. So if you're new to writing a series, plan it out, take your time, think of the details, outline it a little bit. You tell me about, we were talking about outlining the other day. Tell me, as a writing coach, what is your advice for that and your strategies too?
Number 1, play to your strengths. Always, 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 always. Because if you're not playing to your strengths, it's kind of like fighting yourself.
Uh-huh.
And so for you, TK, I would say it's like, okay, if I enjoy, having an ending and then just writing toward that, you don't want to change that unless you're like, unless you get this sensation like, oh my gosh, I'm shaking things up. I'm going to go extra crazy and just not even have an ending. But most of the time that's going to be your go-to. And that's really key. Like I would never say like to fight that, especially if you're consistently showing up and you have the results of, published books.
Yeah.
My personal process is kind of in the middle. A lot like you, I like to have at least an ending in mind because otherwise I have no clue where it could go. And then I kind of that's where I think the infamous writer's block comes in. You have no clue what comes next.
Yeah.
I like to have one piece of paper and I like to just sketch out ideas and scene ideas. And eventually that one piece of paper grows to a bunch of index cards on a big bulletin board, like the science fair kind.
Yeah.
So then it becomes scene by scene. And that's it really for the outlining. And also I've learned the hard way myself, like, you're going to have some challenges because it's not the most in-depth outline. It's a little more, hey, scratch off that, let's move that one index card, let's drop that, let's just put a new index card there, and maybe a couple other, that follow.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I feel like I'm kind of in the middle because I can't write at the very end, I wrote like a more involved summary just to make sure it connected better. But like early on, I'm a lot like you, where it's like, hey, just having that ending. If you don't have the ending, I'm kind of like, I think everything would become a thriller.
Yeah.
Or a mystery. It's like, you have no clue.
And it's funny because I feel like I personally have the tendency where I always have to leave endings open. Like there's a wrap up, but then I always leave you like with a question or with, oh, but what else could happen? Or I feel like there's always this little twist at the end, and I have trouble just ending it nicely and not just, I don't know. I'm not fair to my readers, I guess.
I think that's the Nolan influence.
Yeah.
And the fact you are a series writer.
Yeah. Definitely.
And that's okay. That's good. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about you talking about your process is we've talked about the Enneagram a lot. You're a 4, I'm a 1. Like I'm type A. Everything is lists and to-dos and schedules and times. I'm very structured. You're very loosey-goosey. How do I feel? What's my mood? But then I feel like we're flip-flopped in writing. Like I'm very much like, let's just see what comes to me today. Am I in the mood to write? Yeah. And I need to be more structured like you've learned to be, and that you're teaching others. Well,
again, it's trial and error.
Yeah.
It is, I think, to an extent too. And anyone who tells you otherwise, it's always, there always is some experimentation and trial and error in there. But I think too, creativity is such a different kind of thing than other areas of our lives. And
yeah, they're true.
You know what I mean? I like how a painter approaches, a painting could be very different than, doing your taxes or other chores or other things in life. And I think it's just, whatever works for you, as long as you're showing up. I think that's the real litmus test. As long as you're showing up and doing it, right?
Definitely.
Any final words of advice or encouragement for other writers out there? I know we mentioned the, writing a series. You mentioned some of your writing approaches. Any last words of encouragement for writers or any other story makers out there?
Yes. Man, and this kind of goes back to the books that influenced you growing up that we talked about. Know the stories that you love that influenced your life and know why they did. I have a stack of books. I had it for our discussion today. Let me pull them out. Harry Potter is important to me because it taught me that there is adventure inside of stories, that not all books are boring and there's magic, Ella Enchanted taught me that I can be emotionally involved with characters and it's okay. I can hate this sister. And then here's some more. Oh my goodness. Garth Nix taught me that it's okay to write about dark, scary things. Sabriel is a book about a girl who journeys into death to solve a mystery. Like she has this magical ability. It's inherited from her father. But it just taught me that it's okay to write about things that aren't all happy sunshine and daisies. It's okay to write about things that are scarier and darker and that you can learn from that, which I thought it was really cool. And then Christopher, I can't not mention Christopher Paolini. I don't know if you guys know Aragon. It's a very famous book. It became a movie, but it's actually called The Inheritance Cycle. This is the final book, and I'm holding this one because this one changed my life. Not my life, but my writing mentality. The ending, it's not a spoiler. You don't have to kill the bad guy to win. Ooh. And every book I read, the bad guy is defeated by being killed or like violently defeated, through violence. And yes, there's fighting. It's all about dragons versus, the evil king. But this book taught me that sometimes it's about making someone understand. And if they can understand why you're fighting for what you're fighting for and why they see what they did was wrong, and vice versa. You know, they went through this moment where they just had this moment where they understood each other. And that is what led to the ending of the series. And that was game changing. And I'm trying not to give away spoilers while also
it's hard sometimes, isn't it?
So impactful. But I think knowing the books that are important to you, but why they're important to you. It's not just, oh, that was a fun adventure. Well, what about it was so fun? Because that will help you know how to write better. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that is such a big takeaway. How stories can help us, you know, change things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Understanding versus just killing the enemy.
Yes.
Which, again, that is so anti-hero's journey in some ways, because it's like, you'd have to win, you know. Yeah. The knight always has to slay the dragon, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really powerful. And I think that's a lesson for us as creators to, you know, just try to, you know, think a little bigger.
Yeah.
And to increase empathy, to increase understanding. When someone puts down your book, maybe they can think of things a little bit, you know, differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to go here. My 3 books, Self-Conclusion, Altar, Prophecy, you know, they're all here. It's hard to like, where am I at in the camera? My big thing was I wanted people to walk away learning that sometimes what you want isn't what's best. I mean, one of my main characters has to give up everything he spent his life working towards, but he did it because he knew it was right. And he did it because he knew it would save people. And so he had, like, he could have saved people one way, but it would have been a selfish way and more people would have suffered for it. And he had to consciously say, okay, I will give up what I want because maybe this other path is what's better for everybody and for me. And, you know, he discovers that what he wants maybe wasn't what he needed, kind of thing. And it's so hard to talk vague, but I can't, that's a big spoiler. I can't give away too badly, but it's learning sometimes to die to your own self once. It's learning that you can rely on others, even though you've been hurt. It's learning to not knowing your own history, maybe not knowing your own family doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean the people who raised you aren't your family, you know, lots of themes there. And yeah, I don't know. It's so important. All these different things, so important. And we need more stories for more people to learn this stuff.
Where can people find out more about your awesome books and get the updates and connect with you?
tkjohnsonbooks.com. That is my website. That's kind of the go-to. I'm not very consistent with blogging, but if there's big updates, go there. I have a newsletter sign up where you will get exclusive looks that I won't be posting anywhere else, free stories, some sample chapters. And then, of course, Instagram, Facebook, TK Johnson, author. Those are my other go-to spots. I'm more active on Instagram. Sorry, Facebookers, but it doesn't share as easily. I try, but yeah.
Thank you so much for being with me here on the very first episode of the Storymaker Show. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate it, Jim. And I'm excited to see the other guests you have. Line them up because I'm going to be watching every Friday. Hopefully it's all Fridays. Like you said, Friday fun.
That's right. I love it. Thanks again. And thanks so much to everyone watching and asking questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you.